We are here for the Bent case. I have Scott Davis on behalf of the state in the courtroom. I have Randy Neal also representing the state via Zoom with permission of this court. I have Mr. Bent here along with his attorney John Thomas. This court has scheduled for today a change of plea. Mr. Thomas, is it the intention to proceed with that change of plea hearing today?
It is, Your Honor.
All right. A plea agreement was handed to me. Mr. Thomas, is it the intention to move forward on the change of plea based on the terms of that plea agreement?
Yes, Your Honor, we executed that plea agreement about 5 minutes ago.
All right. And could you, for the record, outline the pertinent terms of that plea agreement, please?
Certainly, Your Honor. Mr. Bent is going to plead guilty to count 1, murder in the first degree. The state has agreed to recommend no greater than 25 years fixed and is free to argue any indeterminate time as it deems appropriate. There is going to be a life tail that's required by statute. The defendant specifically agrees to have all these charges automatically reinstated if any conditions of the plea agreement are violated. The defendant is free to argue for any term deemed appropriate, and there are no other agreements as to sentencing recommendations.
And not binding on the court?
Non-binding on the court, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Neal, is that the agreement you reached with Mr. Bent?
Yes, sure.
All right. Mr. Bent, you heard your attorney outline the pertinent terms of the plea agreement. Is that the plea agreement you reached with the state of Idaho?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I have questions of you in just a few minutes, but I need to ask Mr. Thomas some questions first. Mr. Thomas, do you believe you had sufficient time to fully analyze this case on behalf of Mr. Bent?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Budicofer and myself worked diligently to review all the pertinent information. We believe that we have reviewed the case sufficiently for today's purposes.
Did you have an opportunity to discuss with Mr. Bent all of his rights with respect to this case and whether or not he had any defenses to these charges?
Yes, Your Honor. We looked at several suppression issues and other issues of defense, and we have fully fleshed those out.
Did he have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Bent to determine whether or not he had any evidence in his possession or witnesses that he might call in defense of these charges?
Yes, we looked into that as well.
Knowing what you know about Mr. Bent, do you find that, or believe that he is fully competent to not only stand the charges against him, but the consequences of pleading guilty to those charges?
Yes, Your Honor. We've had a mental health evaluation done, as well as just meeting with him and talking with him. I believe that he is fully prepared to enter a plea today, and I know that he is of sound mind.
Knowing what you know about this case and Mr. Bent, do you consent to him pleading guilty pursuant to the terms of this written plea agreement?
Yes, I do.
All right, I appreciate that. Mr. Bent, at this stage of the process, I just need to advise you that you still have all of your constitutional rights in place. They include your right to have this matter heard by a jury, your right to confront your accusers, your right to present your own defenses, and your right against self-incrimination or your right to remain silent. If we proceed forward today and you actually change your plea to guilty, you will be waiving those constitutional rights. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
The first right that will be of interest will be the right against self-incrimination. What that means is no one can order or require you to testify or otherwise present any evidence to a judge or a jury that could be used to find you guilty of this charge or any other crime. But if we move forward, I will place you under oath. And at some point, I will ask you factually what you did that makes you guilty of this charge. And by providing that information, you will be waiving your right against self-incrimination and your right to remain silent. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Knowing all of that, do you still want to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and if you would, please stand, raise your right hand. My clerk will place you under oath.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this pending cause shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you. Please be seated. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Mark and Jason Bent,
How old are you, Mr. Bent?
42.
How far did you go into school?
Associate of Arts, or Associate of Applied Science in Automotive Technology.
Preliminarily, are you having any difficulty understanding me today?
No, Your Honor.
Do you read, write, and speak the English language?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you feeling well today?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or controlled substances today?
No, Your Honor.
Are you addicted to alcohol, drugs, or controlled substances?
No, Your Honor.
You have any mental or psychological issues or concerns that might prevent you from understanding what we're doing here today?
No, Your Honor.
Are you on probation or parole?
No, Your Honor.
I need to advise you, if you are not a U.S. citizen, pleading guilty could have an impact on your immigration status. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you remember, Mr. Bent, what you have been charged with and the possible penalties for that charge?
Yes, Your Honor.
What have you been charged with?
Murder one?
Do you remember the possible maximum penalties?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, Your Honor. So, yeah, life with a minimum of 10 years, $50,000 fine, and $5,000 compensatory restitution.
All right. This plea agreement that was presented to me today is not binding on the court. What does that mean to you?
That means that, well, I read it, this part here. If the court rejects this plea agreement, the defendant acknowledges that he nevertheless has no right to withdraw this plea.
Correct, and there's other parts associated with that. There will be recommendations at sentencing, both by your counsel and by the state, as to what an appropriate sentence should be. I'm not required to follow either of those recommendations. And again, if I choose not to follow those and sentence you to something different than what is recommended, that again does not give you the right to withdraw your guilty plea. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Do you believe you had sufficient time to fully discuss this case with your attorneys?
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you have an opportunity to review the evidence the state says it has and it would present if this matter were to proceed to a trial?
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you have an opportunity to discuss with your attorneys whether you had any defenses to these charges and whether any motions could be filed to protect your rights and those defenses?
Yes, Your Honor.
Did Mr. Thomas or Mr. Butekoffer fail or refuse to do anything that you asked them to do?
No, Your Honor.
Are you fully satisfied with their representation?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you believe your constitutional or civil rights have been violated in any way through this process?
No, Your Honor.
Did anyone threaten you to get you to plead guilty?
No, Your Honor.
Did anyone say I'd be easy or lenient if you pled guilty?
No, Your Honor.
Did anyone coerce you to get you to plead guilty?
No, Your Honor.
Did anyone threaten you or intimidate you or anyone close to you in order to get you to plead guilty?
No, Your Honor.
Are you pleading guilty freely and voluntarily?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Ben, before I sentence you, I will order a pre-sentence investigation, and that investigation will give me background information about you, both criminal background, if any, and other background. And I will use all of that information to put together a sentence I believe is appropriate. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
You also need to understand that you and your attorney will have an opportunity to review that fully to make sure that that report is accurate. You can add to that and provide your own information. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to circle back to something we discussed at the beginning of the case, Mr. Ben. If we continue forward, you will be waiving your right to have this matter heard by a jury. You will be waiving your right to confront your accusers. You will be waiving your right to present your own defenses. Do you understand you're waiving those rights today?
Yes, Your Honor.
By pleading guilty, Mr. Bent, you'll actually lose some constitutional rights. You will lose your right to vote, your right to hold public office, your right to serve on a jury, and your right to possess firearms. Do you understand you're losing those constitutional rights?
Yes, Your Honor.
If after today you're in possession of a firearm, you could be subject to additional federal and state prosecution. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Ben, knowing all these things that I have asked you, do you still want to proceed forward today?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is there anything you need to ask Mr. Thomas before I ask you to enter a plea in this matter?
No, Your Honor.
And Mr. Bent, with respect to count one, murder one, how do you plead?
Guilty.
What did you do, Mr. Bent, that makes you guilty of that charge?
It was a shooting. I shot the victim, Nikolas Bird.
All right, let me just ask some additional questions. Did this happen in Bonneville County, Idaho?
Yes, sir.
Did it happen on or about September 3rd, 2022?
Yes, sir.
When you shot Nikolas Bird, he died from that act, did he not?
Yes, sir.
And at that time, did you take these actions willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Neal, is that sufficient factual recitation for a guilty plea?
Yes, Your Honor. The only alternative theory was lying in wait, which is part of the 8003 paragraph 1, but all the alternative in that 8003 was 4003 was already admitted to.
All right. Mr. Thomas, is that sufficient factual recitation for your purpose?
Yes, Your Honor, it follows the information word for word.
All right. All right. I do find that Mr. Bent is competent, fully understands not only the charges against him, but the consequences of pleading guilty to those charges. I find that he understands the terms of the plea agreement that he himself signed today, September 21, 2023. And he consents to the terms of the plea agreement. I also find that there is a factual basis for his guilty plea, and that Mr. Bent knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily gave that guilty plea. I will have the clerk enter it on the record. We need to set this matter for sentencing. Counsel, my normal sentencing date would be November 16 of 2023. This is obviously a more significant case. Is that going to be sufficient time to prepare for sentencing? Mr. Neal, I'll turn to you first.
Yes, Your Honor, we'll be ready.
All right, Mr. Thomas, do you believe that's sufficient time?
I believe so, Your Honor. It's almost 60 days. I think that's plenty of time.
All right, so I will order the sentencing for November 16, 2023. For what, at 10 o'clock in the morning? I will order a PSI. Mr. Thomas, any other evaluations, knowing what you know about this case and your client?
Yes, Your Honor, we would ask for a 1925-24. I think that's the one for sentencing purposes.
The mental health
No,
evaluation. I
evaluation.
will order a mental health evaluation for sentencing purposes. I think you're right, it's either 24 or 22.
Right.
Any other evaluations?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Neal, you aware of any other evaluations you believe this court should order for purposes of sentencing?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Bent, do you have any questions of the court with what is expected of you and what the plan is moving forward?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you will be given a packet of information that is necessary for completion of the pre-sentence investigative process. You need to complete that fully in order to have the PSI prepared and for you and your attorney to fully review it in advance of sentencing. If you have questions about what is being asked of you or what is required, you need to turn those to Mr. Thomas's office, and they will assist with that. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Thomas, anything else I need to take up today?
Your Honor, I just reviewed the statute. It is a 1925-22.
Okay. Mental health evaluation under 1925-22.
Yes, Your Honor. That's all I have.
All right. Mr. Neal, anything else from the state?
Nothing further from the state, Your Honor.
All right, and with that, we will be in recess. Mr. Bent, you are excused. Thank you for being here. Mr. Thomas, is that your only matter with me?
That is, Your Honor.
You are also excused. Thank you. Mr. Neal, is that your only matter with me?
That concludes my business, if I
All
may be
right, you
excused.
are also excused. Thank you for appearing. We're in recess on that matter.